In the summer of 2021, China sparked great alarm in Washington when it tested hypersonic missiles. Some in the United States even feared that this test was another Sputnik moment. General Mark Milley, chairman of the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff, denied that the test was a Sputnik equivalent, but said it was very close to that. How real is this fear? What does the nuclear balance of power between the United States and China look like? If the unthinkable happened, what could a nuclear confrontation between the two look like? Let's begin. China has grown immensely wealthy over the last few decades, especially since it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, and Beijing has used large portions of its enriched coffers in the drive to create a world-class military capable of competing with the United States. China's naval and air capabilities have increased enormously, but Beijing is now keen to share the love with its nuclear forces as well. China was one of the recognized powers in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which went into effect in 1970. However, it had always had a limited nuclear capability compared to the true nuclear superpowers of the time, the United States and the Soviet Union. It had few ways of delivering nuclear weapons beyond ICBM launchers and silos, and had a small number of active warheads. That has begun to change at a rapid pace in the last couple of years. In 2020, the United States estimated that China had a little more than 200 nuclear warheads. By the end of 2022, however, China had doubled that number. If Beijing continues its nuclear buildup at this pace, it could have about 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035. However, China is not only building up the number of warheads at its disposal, but the means of delivering them. In 2021, China appeared to be building 200 new nuclear missile silos in its Gansu and Xinjiang provinces. However, China understands that these silos are easy targets, so it's also building more road-mobile ICBMs, new ballistic missile submarines, and new bomber-delivered nuclear weapons. In other words, China is trying to create an effective nuclear triad of its own in a bid to protect its nuclear capability and, if need be, enhance its offensive nuclear potential. China completed the triad with its deployment of the nuclear-capable Zhanhong 6 bomber in 2020. Meanwhile, China conducted 135 ballistic missile tests in 2021, more than every other country in the world combined. The biggest buzz, though, went to its hypersonic test that summer. The July 2021 test featured a hypersonic missile that encircled the world before hitting its target. It flew for a total of 40,000 kilometers, the longest flight of any Chinese land attack weapon on record. At this point, it's always important to clear away some of the cobwebs. Hypersonic missiles, projectiles capable of exceeding Mach 5, are not new. Traditional ICBMs have long exceeded these speeds. What would make China's 2021 weapon new is its combination of a fractional orbital bombardment system, FOBS, with a hypersonic glide vehicle, HGV. A FOBS works by flying into low Earth orbit to an altitude of about 240 kilometers. This allows the device to remain below the line of sight of radar systems designed to pick up the arc of traditional ballistic missiles. Then, before completing a full orbit, the FOBS turns around and performs a retrograde engine burn, slowing its speed so that it will intersect with its designated target. The end result is that a FOBS can strike from an unexpected direction. For example, a missile launched to low orbit over Antarctica can turn around and hit Alaska. The Soviet Union experimented with these systems in the 1970s, but work on FOBS was abandoned after the SALT II treaty banned them, and Soviet submarines became more capable of launching ballistic missiles. China is interested in picking up where the Soviet Union left off, however. Beijing partially sees this as a necessity, thanks to greater American investment in missile defense systems following its withdrawal from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in 2002. The second component of the system, the HGV, makes the FOBS even more unpredictable. Glide vehicles differ from traditional weapons in how they move toward their targets. Traditional ballistic missiles come at a fast but predictable arc. HGVs ride up to orbit, descend, and glide through the atmosphere to reach their targets. An HGV is able to maneuver, roll, or even pull up on re-entry to re-exit the atmosphere and then enter it again. Through these devices, an HGV can alter its trajectory while maintaining hypersonic velocities, making it fast and hard for missile defense systems to predict. China claimed that this test was of a space plane, not a weapons system, but this was a clever response. It exposes the overlap between space vehicles and these types of weapon systems. The hypersonic missile missed its target by about 24 miles. This is of little comfort if such a weapon were to carry a strategic nuclear warhead, however. The test also raised alarms about an intelligence failure, as US officials realized that China's advancement in hypersonic weapons was further along than they once thought. Potentially, China could send this new weapon on a trajectory over the South Pole. The weapon could then turn around and glide towards American targets, because American missile defense systems are focused on trajectories over the North Pole, which is the route that Soviet ballistic missiles would have taken during the Cold War. The new Chinese weapon would leave the United States particularly vulnerable. China's moves are intended to even the playing field in a dangerous game where it had long lagged behind. The United States has the world's second largest nuclear arsenal with 5,224 warheads. The United States currently deploys some of its nuclear weapons to 5 other nations: Turkey, Italy, Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands. The forward deployment reduces the risk that America's ability for nuclear retaliation will be wiped out in an enemy-first strike. It also gives the United States greater ability to launch nuclear attacks of its own. American nuclear warheads were once deployed to Japan and South Korea but have since been removed. If nuclear tensions were to escalate with China, it's probable the United States would redeploy those weapons there, something the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe suggested could be a necessity given the current situation in the region, although he only made this suggestion after his premiership had concluded. The United States is regarded as being behind China and Russia in the deployment of hypersonic technology. There have also been major alarms about the state of America's nuclear triad in the last decade. Most of the weapons and delivery systems are many decades old. For example, the land-based part of the nuclear triad consists of about 400 LGM-30G Minuteman III missiles. This weapon system began development in 1964 and entered service in 1970. It's currently the only land-based ICBM in the United States military, and the Air Force plans to use it into the 2030s. Some of the United States land-based ICBM systems are so old that until 2019 they used 1970s-era floppy disks as part of the command and control system. Other parts of the IT system are as old. While this has the advantage of not being vulnerable to cyber warfare, it also means the system is expensive to maintain, as modern engineers are unfamiliar with it, and the Air Force has increasingly needed to rely on costly civilian specialists to maintain the old architecture. The United States maintains a significant lead over China in the realm of submarine warfare. However, its Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines are also old, with their plans originating in the 1970s, and the first vessels being launched in the early 1980s. Meanwhile, the United States has only 20 active bombers capable of delivering nuclear weapons. Its fleet of B-1 and B-52 bombers were once capable of doing this, but were altered to be conventional only in the 1990s. But these weapons platforms are also old anyway. In recent years, the United States has acknowledged that it allowed its nuclear capability to atrophy following the end of the Cold War. During the Obama administration, the United States made plans to modernize the nuclear triad, which took more concrete shape during the Trump administration. It consisted of a $1.2 trillion plan between 2017 and 2046, including $772 billion for the modernization of strategic nuclear delivery systems, $25 billion for tactical nuclear delivery systems, and $445 billion for facilities needed for the operation of the new nuclear triad. One of the primary weapons in this new arsenal will be the Minuteman III's successor, the LGM-35 Sentinel, which the Air Force plans to have ready by 2030. The Sentinel will come with new silos and a new command and control system. The United States is also working on a replacement for the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine. This will be the Columbia-class submarine, set to launch in 2031, with 12 of the new vessels planned for construction. So important is this goal that the Navy has identified the Columbia-class submarine as its top priority program, a nod to how vital the US submarine fleet is to deterring China's ambitions. Each Columbia-class submarine will be able to carry up to 16 Trident D5 missiles, each of which can potentially carry 12 Mark IV re-entry vehicles. Although the United States has phased out these multiple re-entry vehicles on its nuclear ballistic missiles since 2014 to comply with the New START treaty with Russia, the missiles can be re-equipped with them if the need arises. China is not a member of the New START treaty. Finally, there is the coming B-21 Raider bomber. which is set to replace both the B-1 Lancer and the B-2 Spirit. The Raider was rolled out to photographers for the first time in December 22 and is scheduled to enter service in 2027, with a maiden flight expected in the remaining months of 2023. The Air Force plans to purchase up to 145 B-21s, depending on the plane's engineering and manufacturing development. As the successor of the B-2, the B-21 will be capable of delivering nuclear weapons like the B-61 and B-83 bombs. The United States has also been trying its best to catch up in the hypersonic missile race, and may have closed the gap. In October 2022, the United States launched a test of several hypersonic missile components. These included communications and navigations equipment and a glide vehicle that can withstand the friction generated by moving at hypersonic velocities. The test was designed to validate aspects of the Navy's conventional prompt strike and the Army's long-range hypersonic weapons program. The Pentagon considered the tests a success. For now, these programs are only experiments, and the Pentagon has still not made a formal decision to acquire hypersonic weapons, according to the Congressional Research Service. Still, the Defense Department spent $4.7 billion on hypersonic weapons research in fiscal year 2023, up from $3.8 billion in fiscal year 2022. Adding these weapons to the United States' traditional nuclear arsenal seems inevitable. How might nuclear war break out? China officially has a no-first-use policy when it comes to nuclear weapons, even if its nuclear forces are attacked by conventional enemy forces. Only in the case of a nuclear weapons strike, officially, would China use its own nukes to retaliate. This policy started with its first nuclear test in 1964, when China declared it will never at any time or under any circumstances be the first to use nuclear weapons. This policy was reaffirmed in a classified Chinese document for the operators of China's nuclear forces, where it put repeat reminders about its no-first-use policy. However, there is skepticism in Washington. The document, called The Science of Second Artillery Operations, has a section concerning what Chinese nuclear forces should do if a strong military power possessing nuclear-armed missiles and an absolute advantage in high-tech conventional weapons is carrying out intense and continuous attacks against our major strategic targets, and we have no good military strategy to resist the enemy. This strong military power is clearly the United States. The document suggests that Chinese nuclear forces should lower the threshold in this scenario and put its nuclear weapons on alert. This is an important distinction, because unlike the United States, China's policy has been to keep its nuclear forces off alert. Its warheads are not mated to its ICBMs, and its nuclear-armed submarines are not on continuous patrol at sea. This suggests that China takes its no-first-use policy seriously. By putting its nuclear forces on alert, China would hope to deter the United States from taking further military action and to not use its nuclear weapons in a potential first strike, which may be tempting as military tensions escalate, given the still small size of China's nuclear arsenal in comparison to that of the United States. However, the document's addition of the notion that China could use nuclear threats to compel the United States to stop a conventional attack made Dr. Gregory Kalaki, the China project manager at the Union of Concerned Scientists, uneasy. The use of nuclear threats to stop a conventional attack can slip into escalation if conventional fighting breaks out. Within the confined and disputed waters of the South China Sea, there are many places where this can happen. It would not necessarily take something as dramatic as a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. An accidental encounter in the South China Sea, such as during one of the United States' Freedom of Navigation operations, FONOPs, could be the trigger to a broader conflict via miscalculation. Close military calls between the United States and Chinese armed forces have happened during these FONOPs before, as China becomes more and more aggressive in asserting its territorial claims in the area, claims that the United States does not recognize. Suppose it's the year 2031. The United States and China are at a standoff over an attempted blockade of the South China Sea's shipping lanes to Taiwan or another American ally in the region. A FONOP leads to a protracted firefight between vessels of the United States Navy and the PLAN. If conventional conflict escalates enough, or if China's leaders consider themselves threatened enough, nuclear readiness of the like Dr. Kalaki suggested could cause further tensions and make one of the two sides believe that the other is going nuclear. For the United States, the threshold for a nuclear strike is lower than one would believe. It does not have a no-first-use policy. Authorization to use nuclear weapons can only come from the president. Critics suggest that this should be changed and that further restraints should be placed on the president. But for now, the president can authorize a nuclear strike at any time and for any reason. The only limitation to this authority would be under the laws of armed conflict. For example, if the attack would cause unnecessary humanitarian suffering, or if the attack's target is not a military necessity, the order could be disregarded. However, even in these circumstances, it's likely only that the order would be changed rather than halted. So if the president believes that China will disregard its no first use policy and resort to nuclear weapons in order to stop a conventional conflict between it and the United States, American nuclear weapons may take to the skies. Once conventional pressures heat up, the impetus to respond and create a nuclear first strike could become acute if the United States believes its missile defense systems will be overwhelmed, or if China believes that it will lose its ability to retaliate thanks to its relatively small nuclear arsenal. Preventing this from happening would require seemingly trustworthy communication between two sides that have already been shooting at each other. How might a nuclear war go? Even with its aging triad, the current nuclear balance of power favors the United States, especially beneath the waves. The United States currently has 14 Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. Each can carry up to 20 nuclear-armed ballistic or cruise missiles. Some of these are deployed to the contested waters in the Indo-Pacific region. If a nuclear confrontation were to break out with China, the submarines would give the United States its greatest advantage. China is far behind the United States when it comes to underwater warfare. Detecting America's nuclear-powered submarines is a tall order for China's People's Liberation Army Navy. In a nuclear confrontation, America's Ohio-class submarines would swing into action and attack important targets, such as China's Yulin Naval Base on Hainan Island, which houses its fleet of Type 094 Jin-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. In contrast to the Ohio class, China only has 4 of these submarines, and the United States may hope to take one or more of them off the board by striking the base. Each Type 094 can carry 12 ballistic missiles, with a range between 7,200 and 9,000 kilometers. This would be sufficient to reach the continental United States if launched from the waters near China, but would threaten all of America's bases and allies in the region, plus Alaska and Hawaii. In a nuclear scenario, it's unlikely that all of the Type 094s would be taken out at once. Although they are louder than the Cold War-era Soviet submarines, they would likely be found before they could get into range to attack the continental United States. However, China is also working on a successor ballistic missile submarine, the Type 096, which is quieter and would be armed with new missiles with a range exceeding 9,000 kilometers. The Pentagon expects the Type 096 to be operational by 2030, further adding to China's nuclear readiness. Nuclear missile silos and bases likely to host China's mobile ballistic missile launchers would also be targeted by American submarines. Some of these mobile launchers may have ballistic missiles armed with nuclear-tipped HGVs. Examples would include the medium-range DF-17, with its DF-ZF HGV, which has a range between 1,800 and 2,500 kilometers. This weapon system became operational in 2019, and although it cannot reach the American mainland, it poses a serious threat to the United States bases and fleets in the region. The Ohio-class submarines would be hard for China to remove from the board. Dozens of nuclear ballistic or cruise missiles would come over Chinese airspace in an all-out attack. China has missiles capable of reaching the United States too, and America's interior nuclear bases, naval bases, and silos would come under attack. Air defense systems would destroy some of these, but any that make it through would do devastating damage, and if its hypersonic-related technology comes online, it would have greater success. Additionally, China's leaders have had a long-standing policy of targeting adversarial cities in a nuclear second strike, so even if the United States seeks to avoid civilian areas as much as possible in an attack, China probably won't. It's difficult to tell how exactly a nuclear war between the United States and China would go, except that it would be the most catastrophic confrontation ever recorded. What is clear is that China's nuclear posture is quickly changing from one of minimum deterrence to something far more offensive. The expansion in its nuclear capabilities allows China's military to be bolder in pursuing its expansionist ambitions. Before, America's nuclear superiority made it harder for China to directly challenge the international order led by the United States. That's now beginning to change, and Washington is willing to spend trillions to ensure that its biggest strategic rival does not eclipse its nuclear capability. Describing the current situation as a return to a Cold War-style nuclear arms race may be overdoing it, but one thing is certain: we are closer to that kind of confrontation than at any time since the days of the Soviet Union. What do you think about China's military buildup? How does it change the balance of power with the United States? And what would a nuclear confrontation between them look like? Don't forget to let us know in the comments, and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts.